Great. Thank you very much, Daniel, for that generous introduction, and thanks for encouraging some cameras on when possible. Some of this talk is also trying to model some specific strategies for inclusive teaching in higher education. So that's already a great opportunity to mention a strategy that comes to mind that has been successful for me in the past is that we might also consider, for example, taking turns about being on camera during something like this, because it is, as we all know, easier to talk to someone by seeing some visual cues and human cues back. But at the same time, we acknowledge that we are all having real lives behind these screens, and not everybody can be on camera all the time. So a strategy that we might come to mind right here in the moment as we're having the conversation is considering putting in place some agreements in the classroom so that we take turns about who is able to be on camera in different moments, so we can support each other that way. So Daniel has already shared a couple of words about me. I do like to start my presentations like this specifically because I don't know many of you very well, about stressing the importance of articulating who we are or our positionality in terms of locating ourselves by stating who we are and from where we speak. And I do want to acknowledge as I do this that unfortunately I don't have the luxury and the privilege to hear back from you today. If we were to start a journey together with a full course, this of course would be a reciprocal introduction. So this is where I absolutely want to encourage you who are present in the virtual room to take advantage of the chat to engage. If you want to share your name, where you are joining in from right now, things that matter to you, or something that comes to mind as you listen to what I have to share. And then, of course, we'll have the discussion time as well. Please do use the chat to engage, since it's the means that we have here in Zoom today. And as I shared a little bit about who I am and how I think about inclusion, do consider these questions for yourself as well. Who am I? Who are my relations? Who and what are the places, experiences, and people that have shaped me? So in my case, as Daniel has briefly mentioned, that my journey so far has taken me to a couple different places internationally. I was born and raised in Italy, where I completed my undergraduate studies in foreign languages. That's the square that you see at the bottom left photo. I then spent a couple of years in Nottingham, in the UK, studying English. That's the top left photo of a very old pub in Nottingham. And then really I mostly developed my professional and academic identity when I was at Ruhr University in Rhode Island in the United States. So those are the photos that you see in the very center. That's the Providence Performing Arts Center, and a picture of the Ruhr University campus where you see that giant statue of the teddy bear right in the center of the screen. And then I was at Dickinson College as an instructor, as a faculty member for a year. And after that, I had a role in teaching and learning enhancement at the University of Rhode Island, which is the campus photo that you see on top of the teddy bear one. That's the campus at the University of Rhode Island. And the bottom left also has an image of a lighthouse, which is a very typical Rhode Island landscape. That you would, that would be the sites that you would normally see if you travel around the coast of Rhode Island, which is called the Ocean State. And I am now based at University College Cork in Ireland, in our Center for the Integration of Research, Teaching and Learning. That's the campus that you see at the top right photo. It's my current setting. And at the bottom, I've tried to map for you a little bit about my disciplines as well. Part of the talk today acknowledges the importance of embracing inclusive teaching and learning in higher education across several different disciplines. My journey has definitely been interdisciplinary, but very much informed by arts and humanities. So those are the perspectives, the epistemologies, the ways of making meaning that I bring to this work. And I look forward to the conversation, engaging with you and the perspectives that you bring to the work. So just to briefly mention that, of course, I'm sharing with you some ideas today, but I'm not certainly alone in advocating for the importance of these topics. This is a quote by an author that I always like to draw back from, draw from. Laura Rendon has done amazing work in terms of recasting what she calls the traditional agreements that govern teaching and learning. And she says that it's important for us to remember that we are joining many existing voices that advocate for educational transformation to contribute to the generation of a movement. And the movement portion here matters. To create a new dream of education. The foundation of this dream is a more harmonic, holistic vision of education that honors the whole of who we are as intellectual, compassionate, authentic human beings who value love, peace, democracy, community, diversity, and hope for humanity. I really love this quote because I think it really says it all. It summarizes a lot of really important keywords and messages of what I'm going to share with you today. So she is among the people that have shaped and helped my thinking forward. Here are a few more. Utopia in performance and finding hope at the theater. I very much think about artistic performance spaces as spaces of possibilities, spaces in which we get to imagine something that is not yet, spaces that give us hope. And so thinkers and writers and higher education thought leaders that help us think about the importance of hope and opening up possibilities for hope are very important in my journey, in my life. Bell Hooks very much has helped me think about the power of teaching to transgress norms, to transgress rules. And these are among the people that I feel are with me when I feel like I belong. I belong in a field, as I articulated, a field of educational development, of academic development, a field that looks at teaching and learning improvement in higher education as a space in which I feel I'm not alone. I belong and I can breathe for justice with others that deeply care about the impact that we have in our journeys, in our students' journeys, and in each other's. There are many emergent trends in this field. There are, some of the keywords that you'll see in my presentation today very much draw from decolonization and decolonizing the curriculum and higher education work. The field of partnerships, pedagogical partnerships, and engaging with our students as authentic partners in this work is very much informing my current work in higher education. And of course, this work that specifically talks about the importance of fostering social justice, belonging, and mattering. And I think it's very important that we don't shy away from actually saying the big words and principles that guide our work and articulate our values. So for me, the language of love and hope explicitly used is an important piece of doing this work in an authentic way, in an engaging way, in a way that can empower and inspire others. So I try to do that in the various facets of my work, which actually encompasses working with different types of learners. So my typical learners along the journey have been undergraduate students. When they are undergraduate students, they are typically students of a foreign language and culture, students of Italian, and or students of theater. So this is an image of my students when I was at Dickinson College in a theatrical production that they put together completely in Italian. But my learners are also, and now more often, higher education teachers, higher education professors. So this is an image from a faculty development retreat that I co-facilitated with some colleagues in the United States. It's based on the deep teaching principles, which we'll talk about a little bit today. But it was an intensive, immersive faculty development retreat for teachers of STEM. So I highlight this to say that I have the privilege to bring arts-based, as you can see, very embodied ways of making meaning and learning, also to spaces and to learners that typically don't engage in theater-informed work. And there's a lot that we learn about ourselves when we let go a little bit and experiment and play with the possibilities there. And then my other group of learners are others in my same field, others who impact teaching and learning in higher education as educational developers. So this is a workshop that we co-facilitated about the importance of embodying our stories to find more human-centered and sustainable ways to do the work that we do in higher education. And this was at the International Consortium for Educational Developers, so really facilitating for other colleagues like me. So just to give you some sense of the layers of the work, which I guess goes from maybe a more micro level layer of the individual classroom, which might be where some of us or most of us in this class are thinking about, to the more macro level of the teachers themselves and the ripple effects that they have on others, as well as the more system level thinking for those of us who impact higher education policies and practices more broadly. So the title of the talk is Advancing Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. This is, of course, very, very large. So to just orient ourselves a little bit, I have a couple of observations about terminology here, and then a little bit of a focus on what we're going to try and do today. So words are helpful because words allow us to say things. And if we're not able to name something, then we can't really address it. At the same time, the moment that we use any vocabulary or terminology, we are also bound to its history, to how it has been used before, how it might not be the best word in any given moment, depending on who's in the room, depending on the language that someone speaks, and depending on how much something gets stultified or blocked or frozen because it has been named once in a certain way. So what I'm trying to encourage us to do here as we think about inclusive teaching is to think beyond fixating things into one single definition of what a best practice or a good practice might be, and use language to really play with that and engage with that and create together a definition that works for each individual, for each of us. I broadly think about justice as the utopia that is driving the work, kind of a place that we can never fully get to, but that is the driving force towards what we're trying to do. I think about diversity as who's present, right? Who is actually in the room, whose ways of being, whose ways of knowing, whose epistemologies, whose ways of existing in the world are acknowledged as valuable and matter in a space. I think about inclusion as the how we foster these spaces when we engage with each other in our systems, whose perspectives and whose values are brought to the table. And we'll talk a little bit more about specific definitions of equity, but largely speaking, when I think about equity, I think about the larger systems that influence and shape the forces that are beyond one individual and create what the literature has called achievement gaps, but more and more I like to define these as opportunity gaps, as in it's not a student-specific lack that determines their lack of achievement, but it's really how the systemic access to resources and opportunities creates inequitable spaces. So there are many, many frameworks for inclusive teaching and learning in higher education that we could draw from, and there are many ways that we could tackle this. We could be thinking about designing in and of itself the structure of a course. We could be thinking about the day-to-day teaching strategies. We could be thinking about learning through critical reflection. This is a highly recommended resource that recently came out, 2023, the Northern Guide to Equity-Minded Teaching. I believe it's one of the follow-up resources that you have available, so it's why I'm starting from there. So just to give us some focus today, of the many things that we could be focusing on, and of course all of these connect to each other, right? So each of these elements, when we think about how we design, how we think about assessment, of course then it trickles into how we're going to foster spaces that nurture trust and belonging on a daily basis, and it connects back to who we are as people and how we are reflecting. For today, our entry point there will be that piece around the self, that piece around the critical self-examination that allows us to learn through critical reflection. So in that sense, that focus on the self, I'm going to articulate that in terms of a cultural self-awareness, in terms of our awareness of who we are, how we are positioned in our own culture, and how that influences our ability to understand others and engage critically with the difference of our students. So here's the statement that we're going to play through and with, and go deeper into some of these terminologies in the rest of the time we have together. What role does cultural self-awareness play in our teaching practice as inclusive educators? Specifically, how does cultural self-awareness intersect with our ability to design and facilitate equitable learning experiences, and do so across the disciplines, no matter what type of content we're delivering? Experiences that foster growth mindset, purpose, agency, and sense of belonging and mattering for all of our students. So let's look a little bit at that vocabulary. And here's a little bit of a roadmap of how we're going to try and tackle this. So in any given moment, you can come back to where we are in the map, and hopefully that helps us guide the ideas that I want to share with you, the provocations, or the thoughts to consider for our then open discussion afterwards. So I'm going to situate education in the context of what it means to educate for liberation and educate for equity. I'm going to talk a little bit about this acronym that I really love because it spells out GPS, very helpful to remember what it means to foster a learning mindset, GPS. We're going to define cultural self-awareness, and I'm going to share with you some very recent research about intercultural development that is looking at the intercultural pendulum as a model of intercultural development. And then I'll share a few thoughts about the importance of engaging in this work transdisciplinarily across the disciplines. So in terms of education as liberation and equity, again, just to ground us in some common definitions, there are many out there, but this is one that I like because it's relatively simple. By equity, we mean accounting for differences in individual attributes and experiences for the purposes of achieving equal outcomes in our work and for our students. Now, when we come to any moment of encounters, such as a university classroom, there are a vast variety of diverse lived experiences that everybody brings into that moment of encounter and into that arbitrary amount of time that we have together, from the beginning of a course to the end of it, or from the beginning of a program to the end of it. And this really matters because education historically is a double-edged sword. I absolutely believe that education has the potential to liberate. And yet, unfortunately, historically has also very often operated as a means of oppression. A lot of decolonization scholars have worked on this, about how elite dominant groups will repeatedly dictate through schooling the ways in which it is appropriate to speak, to behave, even to think. And this effectively erases multiplicity, it stifles voices. So educational spaces are intrinsically shaped by these complex intersectional layers of power, privilege, and culture. An example from my own work when I was completing my dissertation on teaching and learning Italian and foreign languages is in Italian history. There was a very strong moment in the national unification in which education and schools were very intentionally leveraged as the space where proper Italian would be taught. And that, of course, played a role into erasing and reducing the importance and the cultural presence of dialects, for example. But dialects very much survived in the theater as a live space to make meaning and for minority cultures to survive. So in teaching and learning a foreign language, or even our first language, how do we acknowledge the diversity of possibilities that are erased when we standardize, when we determine that this will be the one grammatical correct, recognized grammatically correct way of expressing a thought? And what does that do to sense of self, to speakers that are diverse? And what does that do to the beautiful landscape of all of our accents, and how much instead we can really gain and learn by embracing that diversity and multiplicity of dialects and ways of speaking. So in spaces that are unfortunately not created equal, when we approach any experience here in our world, we have to recognize that we often are dealing with spaces that are inequitable. Now, an equality-based approach might advocate giving everybody the same resources as the image that we see at the bottom left. But the reality is that the system remains crooked and not everybody will have access in the same way. So an equity-minded approach would then say, well, we need to acknowledge that's the situation and how we can repair or address so that people can access learning or resources in a more equitable way. Now, if we were to actually look at a justice-oriented approach, that would actually look at the tree itself as the root where we need to have an impact and change things. So that's the image that we see at the bottom right, in which the system itself has been somehow readdressed. So thinking about what that means for our students and our classrooms, not only in terms of, as we are seeing on the left, how an equity-minded approach might take us a step forward than an equality-based approach when we think about the barriers that some of our students will encounter when they enter our classes. But also thinking about how the reality is incredibly unequal and what it might look like to then actually remove the barriers themselves, rather than only thinking about more symptomatic, I guess, approaches to equitable interventions that we can put in place. So let me stop there for a second and ask you, and feel free to share in chat if you're comfortable. What does a truly liberatory learning experience look and feel like? And just write for yourself. You don't have to share any of it. Think about a learning experience of yours, a moment when you felt truly motivated, something that empowered you and promoted your success. What were those circumstances? Who was involved? Why was it so special? I'm gonna give us a couple of minutes, and if you do want to share even just one word or one phrase, one feeling that comes to mind, feel free to do that in chat. I'm seeing choice, I'm seeing unity. Oh, that's very interesting. Truly understanding something. Understanding is such a complex. Individuality, so maybe an attention to the individual and who we truly are in a holistic way. Choice speaks to agency, right? Being able to actually have a voice in determining which direction to go. Now, depending on our previous experiences, free to make a choice. There's freedom, there's independence, there's autonomy there. Depending on our previous experiences, not all of our students may have had the privilege to experience a lot of these affirming, nurturing learning previously. So a lot of what we are doing whenever we start a path together is also acknowledging that we have a lot of work to undo previous experiences. And for those of us who have had several of these reaffirming and nurturing moments, we actually are bringing a lot of that capital, like learning capital and ability to do that for ourselves, right? and make sense of a new experience in a positive way. But if those past experiences have actually been very negative, we know that accumulation of past experiences actually influences how we're going to currently interpret any new experience that comes our way. So if we think about our students that may have had more inequitable experiences in their past, a lot of the work that we're doing is trying to reset the stage so that the accumulation of negative experiences and interpretation can actually change, right? We can actually have an impact through intentional interventions. So the work that helps us think about this from psychology, thinks about actual interventions and implementation that can foster social belonging, that can foster, and we'll talk a little bit in more detail about growth mindset, affirmation of individual values, actually engaging with feedback in a way that is assuring, in a way that is validating, in a way that is affirming. So that brings us to that GPS learning mindset that was part of our map there. So GPS, this comes from the work of the CUNY Institute Mindset Workshop in collaboration, the CUNY Innovative Pedagogy team in collaboration with UVA's Motivate Lab. A learning mindset GPS centers G for growth mindset. So a belief that intelligence can be developed through hard work. It's not a fixed entity or amount that we have, but we can actually grow through the use of effective strategies. And this actually helps both us and others around us. P for purpose and relevance. A belief that the work we're doing in school is actually valuable because it's personally relevant for where I want to go. And S is for a sense of belonging, belief that one is connected to and respected by peers, cared for by teachers and mentors, and fits in with the culture. Now let's put a pin in that, and fits in with the culture. Now, if this is, and notice, of course, all of these, we're talking about psychological interventions. So all of the mindset items that we're talking about here are about how a learner believes. What they actually believe to be true influences how they are experiencing something. Now, the literature around growth mindset is varied, of course. Something that I find a really helpful reminder is this idea of the not yet. So just shifting our students' perspective whenever we are hearing something that is an indication of a fixed mindset. I am just not good at doing this. I am just not good at math. I just cannot do foreign languages. And shifting that perspective to I cannot do something yet. This doesn't work yet. It doesn't make sense yet. To go back to Ana Luisa's point there, I don't truly understand this yet, right? It's a very powerful shift because it moves us from a space of fixed and inability to change to a space of agency in which the choices that we make, the hard work that we put in will have a different impact. And as we know, the mindset shift has a huge potential because it actually means moving from a space in which we avoid challenging tasks, for example, to a space in which we embrace challenging tasks as learning opportunities. It moves us away from giving up to actually persisting and trying. It also helps with how we engage with feedback, right? When I receive something that is not yet the result that I want, I actually engage with the feedback so that I can learn from it rather than just giving up. And it also impacts how we see others. If others around me are being successful and I am in a fixed mindset in which I don't think I have the potential to get there, that is going to have a very negative interpretation for me. But if I actually feel that where they got is something that I can also get to, I'm going to find inspiration and motivation in the success of others. So really fostering that social aspect of learning. And that social aspect, of course, also significantly connects with a sense of purpose, feeling connected to others. This is the recent work by Peter Felton and Leo Lambert and many others that have drawn from this idea that relationships really are one of the huge success factors that impact our students' journeys in higher education. Now, we had put a pin in our third element there, the sense of belonging. Now, if we truly are to engage with the fact that each of us is a unique individual, Ana Luisa said, individuality there. We each are this unique combination of traits and experiences that make us who we are. And this is a tapestry of my students, by the way, from a class called Artful Teaching, which was about integrating visual and performing arts in foreign language and culture teaching. This was their own project of a self-portrait through photography. Each of our learners is a unique combination that makes them who they are. Then how are we really going to foster belonging and mattering for everyone, especially if a portion of belonging is about fitting in with the culture? And this is where recent literature that looks at belonging and disentangles those two parts of belonging, fit and value, is very helpful, because it has helped me think about that despite its utility, and it's incredibly positive that we are more and more talking about belonging in higher education. It also contains a potential for fostering integration in ways that erase difference. So if we think about the two components of belonging as fitting in and actually being valued in a system, the fit might misinterpret feelings of marginalization and miss opportunities to understand what leads these students to actually learn and thrive. So the language of mattering instead really centers that even when we don't belong, meaning that we don't fit, it might be that we will never fit in the culture. And rather than approaching that as a deficit element, how can we think about why that matters? Even if we don't fit, we can still matter, and that diversity can matter in a system and in a classroom in really important ways. So that brings us to that third element of cultural self-awareness. If I want all my learners and students to matter, even if they are radically different than myself, what does that entail? What does that take for me to be able to do that work? To be culturally self-aware, and it might be helpful for us to provide a definition of what I mean by culture, first of all. So culture, very broadly defined, and this comes from the IDI, which is the Intercultural Development Inventory. It's an internationally validated and recognized assessment tool for intercultural development and intercultural competence. And you can find more resources at the link there. Culture in the Intercultural Development Inventory definition is defined in terms of the fact that each of us has a worldview that is related to participation in one or more groups. And these groups are defined by many items, by many traits that we might be singling out in any specific moment, national or racial or ethnic boundaries, but also any other affiliation, religion, region, gender, sexual orientation, ability, socioeconomic status. So the construct of difference is what we're looking at here in and of itself, which then might be articulated depending on the specific identity that we're looking at in a certain context. It might be marginalized or centered in different ways. But the notion of the construct of difference is in and of itself what we are looking at. So when we think about our cultural self-awareness, our ability to engage with that difference, we are really thinking about the ability to critically recognize, first of all, difference, and then engage with it positively. So the Intercultural Development Inventory works with the Intercultural Development Continuum, which is a model developed among many others by the work of Milton Bennett. His model was slightly different, has 6 components instead of 5, the model of intercultural sensitivity. The idea here is to think about how an individual moves from a monocultural mindset, in which the first stage that the continuum articulates is a state of denial, not even seeing difference at all, right? We completely miss the existence of difference, all the way across the continuum to a space in which we not only see difference, but we value it, we comprehend it in a complex way, and we might be able to bridge across moments of difference in a state that the continuum calls adaptation. Back to my comments about the utopia of justice, I don't think that that's, the models are helpful because they help us articulate things. I don't know that any of us will ever completely be right in an adaptation mindset all the time. And of course, there are considerations around which specific difference we are thinking about when we engage in something like a questionnaire like the Intercultural Development Inventory. But that notion of a progression in terms of our ability to critically engage with difference is what matters here. It matters because no matter which framework for inclusive teaching we're looking at, that piece around who we are and what we bring to the table as instructors will always play a role. So this is, relatively dated work, but the piece around who students are, who we are, will always have a role in how we then are able to engage with course content and with teaching methods. So in this model here, for example, the instructor knows themselves, right, and moves from a monocultural mindset to a multicultural socialization capacity. Slightly newer, but very similar framework from the work of Akara and others, and adapted from Adams and Love. What we bring to the classroom, there's the students, there's the curriculum, there's the practices, and there's us, our perspectives, our biases, acknowledging, right, all the work around implicit bias, that it's not something that we can objectively remove, that it's part of who we are as humans, but it's something that we can be aware of and work with. This is from the work of Ruhr University. They have a lovely website focused on teaching for equity and inclusion. And again, all of those components, right, will start to be familiar. Who are our students? How do we teach? What are the practices? How do we assess? What's the content? And of course, as always, these things are interrelated. All the models that I really appreciate, at least, will always have an interrelation among all these elements. Who are we? What do we bring to the table? Now, I said we will look at the deep teaching model specifically in detail. So this is from the work of Brian Dewsbury. I believe it's one of the follow-up resources as well in the module. The deep teaching model advocates, again, a cyclical nature of the work that moves from self-awareness to our increased ability to relate with our students, develop empathy for the experience of another, so that we can then utilize varied pedagogies, develop a trusting climate, and effectively use and leverage our networks. All of that brings us back, of course, to an increased self-awareness. Now, what I really want to zoom in on here for that self-awareness piece is why intercultural and cultural self-awareness matters to be able to move from that space of self-awareness to empathy and understanding the experience of another. So I've put the reference there for your if you want to dig deeper into this, and I'm very happy to share the slides as well. Basically, what I'm trying to do here is unpacking that passage from self-awareness to empathy, because it is a process that has crucial intercultural development components. If self-awareness is about metacognitive attention to our own processing and behaviors, as always necessarily informed by our fundamentally unique combination of experiences that make us who we are, then to move towards entertaining the possibility of understanding the experience of another, we are making a move of humility, right? We are heightening our capacity in recognizing that that accumulation of behaviors, habits, experiences is only one of the many, many, many possible combinations in human plurality. It means then being able to exercise cognitive flexibility. That humility helps us de-center the self. So if I know who I am and where I sit, I'm going to be able to increase my capacity to de-center that experience, leading to an increased awareness to shift cognitive frameworks of reference beyond the ones that I'm used to, beyond the ones that I'm socialized into. And there are many specific learning activities, of course, that can target this. There's an example that at the end of the resources that we can look at if we want to in our discussion time. So these intentional learning practices can eventually enable us to entertain that possibility of experiential and epistemological empathy, flexibility towards the never completely obtainable goal of entertaining experiences, feeling, or thoughts like another who is not the self. Now, very quickly, because I know we want to get to our discussion time, that piece around the pendulum really matters to me because I found it incredibly eye-opening because it brings in a notion of movement. So if we learn through experience and we're always moving from something that is in our comfort zone, right, something that we already know, without going all the way into a panic zone of something that is completely foreign to us, staying in that learning zone means moving. It means having some back and forth engagement with something that challenges us enough so we can learn from it and integrate it into who we are. So if we look at this model, there's something about that monodirectional growth that implies that this is a kind of a teleological, there's a desired goal there, right? And we are going from a state of less to a state of more in our ability to engage with difference. But what this one monodirectional model is missing is the actual focus on difference or similarity. So if denial doesn't see difference at all, then polarization actually not only, right, so in polarization, we are seeing difference for the first time and it's a shock, right? It's something is so completely different than ourselves that we go into polarization. It's a complete separate, right? There's a judgment there about the difference that the other brings to the table. When we move past that, we can get to a space of minimization, which de-emphasizes difference. That's the space in which we kind of go, oh, well, we're all the same, right? Yeah, we're all human. We all want the same things. So that is actually reducing the focus on difference. Then when we move into acceptance, we're actually embracing, oh, no, wait a minute, we're not all the same. And it matters that we're not all the same and we don't necessarily all want the same things. So that eventually we can think about how to bridge across difference. So what Aikson and Schneiderbean have done is actually putting these 5 stages rather than on an ascending continuum, on a pendulum. And so we see that when we're in denial, we're just only focused on the similarity, on the self. When we swing all the way to polarization, right, we are only seeing difference and being quite violently swung towards difference. But then if we move towards minimization, there is an oscillation there that is eventually going to help us find a balance between a focus on similarity and a focus on difference. So that's ideal state of adaptation is not necessarily at the top of an ascending trajectory, but really it's a balance between the focus on self and knowing who we are and the focus on difference and being able to see another and harmonize that relationship. And they also very helpfully think about what are experiences that can be magnets in either of the 2 directions. So we know that a traumatic or a significant exposure to difference, for example, can make us swing back and forth along our developmental continuum. And this is actually naming what those experiences might be. What are the things that bring us towards stability? What are the things that swing us towards the extremes in terms of separatism, in terms of being magnetized towards needing affinity in any given moment of our life, or traumatic encounters with difference, moments in which we are magnetized towards really focusing on difference rather than affinity. And then those examples of anchors are really meaningful for us to be able to be teachers that see and recognize difference critically without being swung in too much in either of the 2 directions. Emotional and physical health and well-being, diverse social networks, habits of mindfulness. These are all practices that we can intentionally engage in to foster our ability to be inclusive, self-aware teachers. So I'll stop in a minute there, just very briefly, why this matters across the disciplines. As someone who has worked across different disciplines, this is something that has attracted me to teaching and learning is in and of itself as a field that doesn't necessarily belong to only one discipline. So if you're not familiar with the term SOTL, the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, is a field that has been defined as people coming across from diverse disciplines to think about why teaching and learning matters. So my recent work has very much engaged with trying to understand what it means to be scholars of teaching and learning who think about inclusive pedagogy, not coming from just a space of education, but really engaging across diverse ways of being academics and being scholars in higher education. So very broadly, we're thinking about how it matters that we forge communities that talk through disciplinary differences, what it means to produce scholarship that inhabits diverse, potentially transdisciplinary ways of making meaning, and how intentional focus on teaching and learning development in and of itself is a pedagogy that fosters professional development for ourselves as teachers and scholars that can transfer across any disciplinary classroom. So there are things in our content that are specific to our disciplines, but there are things in our ability to be inclusive educators that transfer across. So in terms of those anchors in our ability to be intercultural educators, fostering those transdisciplinary communities to have dialogue around teaching and learning, I think is a very important anchoring habit, anchoring experience that we can engage with as educators. So I'll stop there, and in preparation for our discussion time, I do want to give you 1 minute to, distill and seal what you've heard, what you might be thinking about, because of course we're all on a journey that it's maybe starting today in terms of some of the topics that you might not have heard before, but it's certainly continuing as we move forward. So what might be some of your takeaways from today? And of course, there will be more after our conversation. Is there a small thing that you want to try and do right away? Is there something that you haven't thought about before and you'd like to ponder further, maybe read some more resources and follow some of those links? And what's something maybe bigger that you want to, jot down, put a pin there so you can try that in the future? And you're part of a class here. Of course, there are others around us to learn with and from. So make sure that you stay in touch with those that are meaningful in your journey. And we can keep these questions in mind as well for our conversation and discussion.